Ernst Jünger's Storm of Steel. Chapter 2. From Bazencourt to Hattonchâtel. In Bazencourt, a dull little town in Champagne, the company was quartered in the school, which, as a result of our exceptional tidiness, soon came to resemble a peacetime barracks. There was an orderly sergeant who woke everyone punctually, barracks duty and roll call every evening, held by the corporal. In the morning, the companies moved out for a couple hours' brisk drill and exercise on the barren fields outside town. I was taken out of this environment after a few days. My regiment was sending me on a training course to Recorvrance. Recorvrance was a small little village nestling in pretty chalk hills, to where all the regiments in the division dispatched a few of their young men to receive a thorough schooling in military matters, from a staff of hand-picked officers and NCOs. We of the 73rd had cause to be grateful to Lieutenant Hoppe for this, and for much else besides. Life in this secluded hamlet was a strange mixture of barracks drill and academic leisure, attributable to the fact that the bulk of the participants had, until a few months before, been attending various lecture halls and facilities all over Germany. By day, the young people were honed into soldiers by all the rules of the art, while in the evenings, they and their teachers assembled around vast barrels brought over from the stores at Montcornet to display much the same degree of discipline and commitment to drinking. When the various units trickled back from their respective watering holes in the early hours, the little chalk village houses were treated to the unfamiliar sight of student hijinks. The course director, a captain, had the pedagogical habit of expecting redoubled efforts in the class the following morning. On one such occasion, we were even kept going for 48 hours straight. It was for the following reason. We had the respectful custom, at the end of a night's drinking, of giving our captain an escort home. One evening, an ungodly drunken fellow, who reminded me of Magister Lucard, was entrusted with his important task. He was back in no time, grinning widely and reporting that he dropped off the old man, not in his billet, but in the cowshed. Our comeuppance was not slow to follow. Just as we had got back to our own quarters for a good lie-down, the alarm was raised by the local watch. Swearing, we buckled our gear and ran to our stations. We found the captain already there, in towering temper, as might be imagined, and displaying an extraordinary zeal. He greeted us all with the call, "Fire practice! The watchhouse is on fire!" Before the eyes of the astonished villagers, the fire engine was trundled out of the fire station, the hose attached to it, and the guard-room was inundated with well-aimed sprays of water. The old man stood up on the stone steps and, with increasing ire, directing the exercise, and calling on us for unstinting efforts. Every so often, he bawled out to some soldier or civilian who happened to provoke him especially, and gave orders for whoever it was to be let off. The unhappy fellow in question was quickly hauled off behind the building, safely out of sight. As dawn broke, we were still standing there, knees shaking, manning the pump. At least where we were allowed to dismiss, though only to get ready for morning drill. When we reached the drill ground, the old man was already there, clean-shaven, fresh and alert, all ready to devote himself with particular zeal to our training. Relations between the men were very cordial. It was here that I made close friendships, which were to stand the test of many battlefields, with many outstanding fellows. Among them, Clement, who fell at Monchy, with the painter Thebe at Cambrai, and with the Steinforth brothers at the Somme. 3 or 4 of us roomed together and shared a household. I particularly remember our rectangular scrambled egg and fried potato suppers. On Sundays we ran to rabbit, a local specialty, or chicken. As I was the one in charge of making the purchases, our landlady once showed me a number of vouchers or promissory notes she had received from soldiers requisitioning food. A wonderful selection of earthly humor, generally to the effect that Rifleman A.N., other having paid his homage to the charms of the daughter of the house, had needed a dozen eggs to help him recoup his strength. The villagers were quite astonished that we simple soldiers could speak more or less fluent French. The circumstance gave rise to the occasional droll incident. Once, for instance, I was at the village barber's with Clement, when one of the waiting Frenchmen called out, in his thick champagne accent, to the barber, who was just shaving Clement, "Et quoi la gueule avait?" complete with sawing motions at his throat. To his horror, Clement calmly replied, "Quant à moi, j'aimerais mieux la garder." Why don't you just cut his throat with it? If it's all one to you, I'd just as soon hang it onto it. Showing this kind of sang-froid that a warrior ought to have. In mid-February, we of the 73rd felt consternation to hear of heavy losses taken by the regiment at Perthes, and felt desperate to be so far from our comrades at that time. The fierce defense of our sector of the front in that witch's cauldron got us the sobriquet, the Lions of Perthes, that was to accompany us wherever we went on the Western Front. Besides that, we were also known as Les Gibraltars, on account of the blue Gibraltar colors we wore in memory of the regiment from which we traced our descent, the Hanoverian Guards, who defended the island fortress against the French and Spanish from 1779 to 1783. The heavy news reached us in the middle of the night, as we were carousing as usual under the eye of Lieutenant Hoppe. One of the revelers, Beanpole Benres, the self-same man who had dropped the captain off to bed in the cowshed, wanted to walk out the instant he heard, because the beer had lost its taste. Hoppe held him back, observing that to do so would be unsoldierly, and Hoppe was right, too. He himself fell a few weeks later at Les Esparges, in front of his company's extended line. On the 21st of March, following a little exam, we were returned to our regiment, which was once more at Bazencourt. Then, following a big parade and a valedictory address from General von Emmich, we left the 10th Army Corps. On the 24th of March, we were put on trains and taken back towards Brussels, where we had amalgamated with the 76th and 164th Regiments to form the 111th Infantry Division, which is what we remained till the end of the war. Our battalion was billeted in the little town of Ernst, set in a cozy Flemish landscape. On the 29th of March, I celebrated my 20th birthday. Although the Belgians had enough room in their houses, our company was installed in a large and draughty barn, which the cutting sea wind whistled through on the cold March nights. That apart, our stay in Ernst was quite restorative, with plenty of drill, but good viculation, and the food also very cheap to buy. The half-Flemish, half-Walloon population was very friendly. I had frequent conversations with the owner of one particular establishment, a keen socialist and freethinker of a distinctively Belgian type. On Easter Sunday, he invited me to lunch, and would take no money, even for what we drank. Before long, all of us had struck up our various friendships and relationships, and our afternoons off we could be seen striding through the countryside, making for this or that farmstead, to take a seat in a sparkling clean kitchen round one of those low stoves, on whose round tops a big pot of coffee was kept going. We chatted away in a blend of Flemish and Lower Saxon. Towards the end of our stay, the weather improved, and we happily went for walks in the attractive, rather watery countryside, the landscape, in which yellow March marigolds seemed to have sprouted overnight, was set off by the sight of numbers of half-naked soldiers along the poplar-lined riverbanks, all with their shirts over their knees, busily hunting for lice. Fairly unscathed myself, thus far by the scourge, I helped my comrade Pripke, an exporter from Hamburg, wrap his woolen waistcoat, as populous as once the garment of the adventurous Simplicissimus, round a heavy boulder, and for mass extermination, dunk it in the river, where, since we left Ernst very suddenly, it will have mouldered away quietly ever since. On the 12th of April, 1915, we were put on trains at Hal, and, to mislead any possible spies, took a wide detour across the northern part of the front to the battlefield of Mars-le-Tour. In the village of Tronville, the company moved into its customary barn quarters, in a boring and squalid dump typical of the Lorraine, put together from flat-roofed, windowless stone crates. Because of the danger from aeroplanes, we were forced to stay in the crowded township most of the time. Once or twice, though, we managed to get to the renowned nearby site of Mars-la-Tour and Gravelotte. Only a few hundred yards away from the village, the road from Gravelotte crossed the frontier, where a smashed French border marker lay on the ground. In the evenings, we sometimes took melancholy satisfaction from going on walks to Germany. Our barn was so ramshackle that you had to pick your way carefully over the joists if you weren't to crash through the moldy planking on the threshing floor beneath. One evening, as our unit, under our descent Corporal Kirchhoff, was busy doling our portions on a manger, a huge lump of oak detached itself from the rafters and came crashing down. It was pure chance that it struck fast a little way over our heads to the crook of two walls. We were more frightened than hurt. Only our precious meat portions lay covered in rubble and debris. Then, no sooner had we crawled into the straw after this ill omen, then there was a pounding on the gate, and the alarming voice of the sergeant major got us out of our resting places in no time. First off, as always with these surprises, there was a moment of silence, then total confusion and din. My helmet! Where's my haversack? I can't get into my boots! You stole my ammunition! Shut up, August! In the end, we were all ready, and we marched off towards the station at Chamberlain, from where a train took us, minutes later, to Pagny-sur-Moselle. The next morning, we were climbing the hills of the Moselle, and stopped in Préigny, a charming hill village, with the ruins of a chateau looming over it. Our barn this time turned out to be a stone construction filled with fragrant mountain hay. Through its window slits, we had a view over the wine-grown slopes of the Moselle, onto the little valley town of Pagny, which was regularly targeted by shells and aerial bombardment. Several times, shells landing in the river brought up vast columns of water. The balmy spring weather was enlivening, and spurred us on to long walks in the wonderful hill country. So exuberant were we that we carried out larking about long into the evening, before finally settling to sleep. One much-loved prank was pouring water or coffee from a canteen into a snoring sleeper's mouth. On the evening of the 22nd of April, we marched out of Préigny and covered over 20 miles to the village of Hattonchâtel without registering any foot-soreness, in spite of our heavy packs. We pitched camp in the woods on the right of the famous Grande Tranchée. All the indications were that we would be fighting in the morning. Bandages packed were issued, extra tins of beef, and signaling flags for the gunners. I sat up for a long time that evening, in the foreboding eve of battle mood of which soldiers at all times have left report. On a tree stump, clustered round with blue anemones, before I crept over the ranks of my comrades to my tent, I had tangled dreams in which the principal role was played by my skull. In the morning, when I told Prepke about it, he said he hoped it was a French skull. This has been Chapter 2 of Ernst Jünger's Storm of Steel.